You know, the first artist edition we saw was the Dave Stevens Rocketeer. No one had seen anything like it shooting from the original artwork. So when you do that, and you always like to leave a little margin around so you see the very white of the modern paper, and you see how the original has faded, and if there's a coffee stain on it, it's on there on the page, and all the corrections and the whiteout. You kind of see all the work that goes into it that is cleaned up for reproduction. So I've been in 5 artist editions now, and the last 2 Wayne and I own. I mean, we're producing them, and when you do, it's so satisfying. You get to design the book and what it looks like, even down to the thread, the colors of the thread on the hand-stitched, you know, binding.
That's amazing. Well, before we open it to questions, I was looking at your Rick something that's very unusual, which is all of his work has a number. All the work that he's done has a number, like a composer. So everything is an opus. And do you leave any out, by the way? I always wonder about that.
No, well, no. If it's my own original stuff, the only one I thought I should have given an opus number to was I did Clive Barker's Age of Desire.
Yes.
And if I do layouts for an artist, and I don't do any of the artwork, I don't count it.
I see. So it's
I have to, another person can pencil it, but then I'll ink it. If I do the layouts and the inks, then I sort of claim it.
I see.
Otherwise, I'm doing it for another artist to do the finishes.
So I found these things that I don't know if they ever happened, like All New Invaders, number 12.
Yeah.
Did that happen?
Yes. Yeah, and for some reason in the credits on the magazine themselves, they just give me credit for inking, but I did the layouts and the inks and some of the penciling in it.
And the Spectre of the Rose happened too?
Yeah, that hasn't been published yet. I've got an ongoing project I've been working on for years of doing 24 songs, much larger, like newspaper tabloid size. And I did some in the early 90s, small, and then I'm blowing them up or doing new versions, larger. But they're all from classical music, songs, and poetry. And this gets really esoteric and pretentious, but there are 24 keys, 12 major and 12 minor, and a lot of composers will do 24 preludes, 1 in each key, major and minor. So I'm going to do these 24 ultimate pieces. I've done about 10, 11, 12 right now. 12 will be rather happy pieces. Others are going to be rather either dark or sad or cynical or whatever. So there'll be 10, 12 in each major or minor key. And so they haven't been published yet. I just did the Spectre of the Rose a couple of years ago from a song by Rossini, one song by Rossini, the other by Richard Strauss.
So this has nothing to do with the Aguilera and Nijinsky and all that, the Spectre of the Rose?
Just the title. I liked it because it sort of tied these 2 unrelated songs together. One is about the serenade by Strauss. He's just at her window at the night and saying, "Come out, come out." And there's a nice place under the linden tree over here. It's the age-old story, but just very flowery. And it's about this rapturous, ecstatic night, which ends with this blooming rose in my drawings. And the other is The Departure, a song by Rossini, and the voice of the narrator is, "If after I'm dead, will you remember me?" So it's a very graveyard kind of scene, and a specter at the end. How even that she has this new life, a husband, a baby, and this ghost comes through saying, "Will you remember me?" And you see her sort of dropping this rose she's holding, and this is sort of a haunting kind of thing. And so the Spectre of the Rose kind of tied them together.
Sounds wonderful. And the last thing that I wanted to ask you is about, you mentioned to me yesterday that you're working on one final. Craig has done wonderful adaptations of my favorite fairy tales, which are the Oscar Wilde fairy tales. As you know, he did the Infanta one years ago, and you're about to embark, or you're already started? The last
I
one?
started doing these fairy tale adaptations in 1991 for NBM publishers. And I decided at the time that there are 9 of them, and I would do all 9. And I thought, well, this will just take me a few years. And so many other projects sort of interfere or happen that you don't want to say no to. And the final one, The Fisherman and His Soul, is the great one, I think, of all 9, and by far the longest.
Yes.
I scripted and laid it out 25 years ago, and it's been sitting in a drawer. I have had a number of things that sit in the drawer for a long time, like the spring running Jungle Book story, Cavalleria Rusticana, but never anything this long. So as soon, I'm going to be finishing American Gods, my adaptation. Talk about working for another artist. Scott Hampton is doing the finished art, but I'm doing the script and the layouts, and I'll be done with that in a few months, about 600 pages altogether. And then I have carved out this spot. I am absolutely doing The Fisherman and His Soul. And that'll be a crowd-funded thing. The first thing we're going to do that is completely original material and crowd-funded at the same time. So we'll see how that compares to like raising money for these artist editions, but that were previously done material that we're working with. But this will be all original, and we'll see what happens. But I've been waiting a long time to do it.
It's going to be amazing. It's going to be absolutely amazing. So I wanted to open the floor up to any questions that you may have. Please.
Craig, I was telling Jose earlier that I'd like you to tell him the story of how Marie Severin taught you to color comic books.
You mean how I lied my way into the industry?
That's right.
It was both Marie Severin and Linda Lessman at the time. Now Linda Reinhold, married to Bill Reinhold, and she was Barry Windsor Smith's girlfriend. So many of those beautiful faces are Linda Lessman. Anyway, it was the second issue of Killraven, and it was the first one that I'd inked entirely on my own. And they were going to give it to an unnamed colorist who I thought was really bad. And I thought, I can't be any worse than this. And so I asked Marie if I could color it, and she was skeptical. She said, well, have you ever colored before? I said, it's all I studied 4 years in college.
You're a painter.
Lie, though it was a lie. But I did some, but I thought, I can do this. So she said, okay, and gave me a set of their colors, and I was going to do it there at Marvel because it was late as usual. And I did it over 2 or 3 days and slept in the reception room. But the first day I was sitting there and in the bullpen and started doing these individual little pictures with a set of colors. It's a very limited palette you have to work with, and you do all the codes, R2, 3Y. Linda Lessman is like looking over and looking over, and she finally came over and said, do you mind if I make a suggestion? I said, no, sure. She said, as she saw me like doing each of these individual little paintings, she said, go through your 20 pages and everything that's blue, fill it in. Everything that's red, fill it in. And some people groan when they hear that, but no, if it's a limited palette and it's like with characters that have red and blue, Spider-Man, you do all the red. That's not going to change page to page, and you get that all done. Then you can go in with your specialized backgrounds, maybe nighttime scenes or whatever. And it made perfect sense. I was, unscrewing the cap and painting blue and screwing the cap back on and taking this. So it was a great lesson on how to color comics. And the thing is, if you do that, everyone had the same experience because you have these art red, blue, and yellow. After you do that and writing those numbers, you go outside and you just look at everything and put a code.
I can imagine doing it. But like I would have never become a colorist in that era. So, do you ever color anything else?
Well, then I did the second one, and the second Killraven, and I really went to town with the colors. And the people who did the engraving, they putting the actual colors on the plates, charged Marvel $100 over each because of the extra work they had to put into it. So basically, and that had never happened before. And they say, you're not coloring anything ever again. So it was like 3 years until I did the Doctor Strange annual.
That's right.
To color that.
That's right. It's a great story. Who has another question?
How did you get the opportunity to work at Marvel?
Oh, well, boy, a lot of luck. And it's like getting into acting. Everyone has a different story, how you get into acting or writing or whatever. I lived in the Ohio River Valley, up by Point of West Virginia there, and Dan Adkins was an anchor at Marvel, and he was from that area just across the river. And he had moved back in the late 60s from New York City, because once you get started, you can, everything was mailed in to the offices. And he was Wally Wood's assistant in the earlier 60s. And there was an article in the newspaper, local artist worked for Marvel Comics and all this. And I was way too shy. I was still in high school, and I was in choir, and the kid next to me somehow knew I was into comic books, and he was Dan Atkins' paperboy. And I thought, well, that's interesting. And I still didn't go to meet him, and I was going to art school in Cincinnati, and my dad had a men's clothing store in this little tiny town, and he needed a little piece of advertising art or something. So he went out to meet Dan Adkins to see if he would do this art, and told him about this kid of his who had 8,000 comic books up in the attic, and Dan said, well, tell him to come out and meet me. And so I did, and that's how I met him. And we would just talk about comics, and he's living out in the country there in this tiny little house. Sometime, a little bit later, he decided he wanted to get an Ohio studio going, in which he would do like layouts and inks and had all these other guys working for him. So he got me and Val Merrick and Paul Galassi, who are all from the same area. Galassi came in just after I left. But for a while, he was producing a sort of a adjunct studio work for Marvel Comics, little short stories and stuff. And that's how I got in. It's how Val Merrick got in. It's how Paul Galassi did. So, there's no one way.
No, I think that your story is unique, but so many of the stories of how people started working in commercial comics is unique because what it does show is that it's important to get to know people.
Yes. Yeah.
To be good in collaborating and working with others, and you were assisting him, and then you were doing your own thing, and then you had other people finishing you. And I think it's very important to be a team player.
Well, yeah, it is networking because, the studios, Marvel and DC, what they call the slush pile of people just sending in their portfolios, copies of stuff. I want to work for Marvel Comics. And they'll eventually get to it, but it's more likely from meeting people at conventions and just networking and then getting some sort of profile or known. Matt Horak is just now started working for Marvel Comics. He's been doing Spidey and Deadpool. Before that, he was doing The Punisher. And he's almost 40 years old, and he'd been coming to my studio for about 10 years, and I would go over his work with him and give him a critique. And he was starting to do some independently published things, and so he would go to conventions. So a lot of stuff going on under the radar, small independent things and people exchanging, working together. But somehow Rob Liefeld came to know him, and he was doing the Book of Daniel, an adaptation of the Bible Book of Daniel, and asked Matt if he would like to illustrate it from his script, adapted from the Bible. So he was doing that. It still wasn't Marvel or mainstream, but he was getting to be known a little bit. But I was thinking, you're almost 40 years old. You're not going to break into Marvel Comics. It just didn't seem like that was going to happen. But then, who was the artist on The Punisher who died mid-issue? Steve Dillon died. He was at a New York Comic Con and wasn't feeling well at all, but you're at the con, maybe you're drinking too much, staying up too late, eating junk food. So he thought it's just that. Well, he had acute appendicitis. And so they were, I was told then, I'm not completely clear on this, but they were going through online different artists, and they saw Matt Horak and invited him to finish the issue and then the rest of the run. Now, there's a crazy way to get into the industry.
And I think that, just this past month, I got 2 jobs that I got because I was the doing colorist for somebody who was, for whatever reason, personal or otherwise, wasn't meeting the deadline. So many times you come as a substitute and you stay.
Yeah.
So we have time for one more question, and then you can ask him more questions later on once you buy those beautiful books that he's selling. Just half kidding. Does anybody have? Okay.
What's your favorite comic you've worked on and why?
Well, I'd have to, if I had to, of my own work, take a single thing to the desert island or throw everything else away, it would probably be Sandman 50, because it's that original story is just perfect, and it was a good mesh of the two of us at the right time in my career. But after that, it'd have to be The Ring of the Nibelung, which was the major project of my career. There's over 3,300 drawings in that, and 400 pages, and I did it at the right point in my career, from the ages of 45 to 50, when I still had a whole lot of energy to work, 10 hours at the board at the end for 3 months without a day off, and you're working 10 to 12 hours to finish the whole thing. And it was a labor of love. So that and the Oscar Wilde fairy tales. Yeah.
All of those are in print, and
Yes.
I bought them as single issues, and then the collection of the Ring of the Nibelung is just beautiful. I love
They
the
just
cover.
came out with a new edition of it, hardcover, and I did a new cover for that. Yeah.
And the Oscar Wilde fairy tales are still in print, aren't they?
I think they are.
I think
Yes.
they keep them in print.
Yeah.
And of course, Sandman has been reprinted in many,
Yes.
many versions. So thank you everybody for coming.
Thanks for coming.
And let's thank Craig again for doing this.
Well, that was fun. Just say goodbye.